2019 is the year I pledged to play through the Castlevania franchise and record my journey through these vlogs, culminating in one big video review at the end. Now for my 11th entry, Castlevania 64. You know, when I started this whole Castlevania adventure, I said I would not do the 3D games because I heard so many bad things about it. I didn't even want to go there. To me, there was nothing of value. But after playing over 10 Castlevania games, I said to myself, you know, I really need to understand the legacy and what happened in the 3D era, because I grew up in that era. I knew what it was like for all these games to go from the 2D to 3D challenge. 3D was all the craze, and everybody was like, nobody wants to play 2D games anymore. Little did they know that 20 years later, 2D games would come back and still be very strong. So anyways, let's talk about Castlevania 64, which is a game I will probably get a lot of parts mixed up with Castlevania Legacy of Darkness because they're basically the same game, but I kind of want to keep them separate for the sake of these diaries. So there are two characters to play, and these games, I'll probably talk about it more in the other one, about the over-welcoming. There's just so much to do in these games, and that's not a good thing because Castlevania in 3D is just not as fun. I start off the game, so you can select two players, right? You got Reinhardt, who has the whip, and then you've got, I believe, Carrie, who has the magic thing. She has like a magic torpedo. Reinhardt and his whip, it's cool, it's iconic, it just doesn't work that well in 3D, and the secondary items are almost even more obsolete, and this is coming from someone who already barely uses the 2D, the secondary items. I just felt even less inclined to use them here. Some good things are, of course, you've got more, I don't know, the open world aspect, like I say that very loosely, the 3D world aspect is kind of cool. You know, it creates more of an atmosphere, but overall, it didn't do it so much for me. The bosses are a lot more interesting, I guess. Oh man, this is so hard to talk about because I can't really compare it to the 2D Castlevania games. They're very different games, but it's still the same branding and universe. I felt the combat, okay, let's go with the combat. The combat felt very repetitive, mundane, and not challenging at all, which is a very big difference and staple to the 2D Castlevania games, where you need to be pretty precise in your positioning and your attacks. With this one, because you're working in a 3D space and it's pretty hard with a whip to control, and I guess they didn't really refine 3D controls back then, it's just, you know, there's a constant swarm of skeletons coming at you in most cases, and they're not really challenging per se. They're just kind of grindy and they're just kind of there to annoy you. There are a lot more puzzle elements to this game, which those I kind of did appreciate. They did go a little bit more on a horror angle now that they're 3D. What comes to mind is specifically the labyrinth. There's this part where you're in a garden labyrinth, and there's like a Frankenstein monster chasing you with a chainsaw, and you can't kill him, and then there's like two demon dogs. That shit was crazy. So when I was going through this, because I knew I just figured I would not enjoy, I just don't enjoy, like going back to the N64 library today is very difficult. These games have not aged well. So knowing that, I tried to go in the game easy so I could breeze through it. Well, Konami thought of people who did that and decided to not let them know that only takes you halfway into the game before you get this beautiful screen that says pretty much you're a dumbass, you noob, you can't play further in this game. Go back and set it on normal, which was, as many gamers like to say, a huge slap in the face. And that part happens right after the very iconic level where you have to carry the potions, and if you get touched or jump, you blow up. Everybody talks about that when they talk about Castlevania 64. So you go through all of the most iconic parts, except the final boss, only to be told you have to restart on a harder difficulty. That pissed me off so much. So that was my time with Reinhardt. I didn't beat the game with Reinhardt, the guy with the whip. I only made it halfway, restarted the game on normal with Carrie, and I'm actually quite happy the game forced me back to the beginning because Carrie was quite fun to play in a 3D Castlevania game. She has this charging shot on her hand, so you can literally run, charge your shot, let it go, and it'll whip around and home in on the enemies, and kill 2 to 3 of them at once. Now you might say, oh, that's cheating, that makes it easy, but remember, the enemies aren't challenging in the first place. Even with the whip, they're just annoying and they just drag you down. So with carry, I just felt the platforming and going through the levels was a lot more natural for a 3D environment. I really think the carry playthrough was a lot better than the Reinhardt one. Also, I don't know what happened to the Belmonts. I'm not very well versed in the lore, but for some reason, Belmonts are out and this Reinhardt guy's in. I don't like that. I really like the Belmont family. You know, I built an attachment to them throughout the last gens of Castlevania, and now that's just being thrown out the door. I don't like it. Then we have the boss fights, which I like the fact that a lot of them are big. And they're not overly difficult like 2D Castlevanias, which really gave me a challenging time in some cases. Like the early stuff was almost unfair. This one, they were big, they were satisfying to beat, and they weren't overly difficult. I like that. The platforming, very early 3D platforming mechanics, not the best. There's a bit of a learning curve to them, but once you get that, it's okay. It's no Mario by any stretch of the imagination, but it's all right. The weirdest boss is, spoilers by the way, the final Dracula boss that turns into some kind of giant centipede boss. Like, what is going on with Dracula? Does he just roll some kind of wheel of what weird creature am I going to fuse with this time? Is it going to be like a minotaur? No, let's do a centipede this time. It just came out of nowhere, and that boss fight was absolutely horrendous. The camera angle, they tried to do something different, and it didn't work. I couldn't understand perspective. I just plowed my way through it where I had like 10 pieces of meat on me and I just kept attacking, eat the meat, attacking. It was very unsatisfying, it was terrible. It was pretty much a great way to end this game, which overall is just not satisfying and not very fun either. The music also nothing did it for me there. Castlevania 64, I'm glad I played it to make my own opinion on it. It's not as bad as I thought it was, but it's definitely not that good. There's not anything that I would recommend anyone to really go in there and try, except the carry gameplay. I would recommend try 2 levels of the carry gameplay because that was interesting and fun to play as. The rest, very forgettable, very bland, just like N64 textures. Anyways, let me know what you guys think if you played in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next Castlevania Diaries. Until then, keep it classy.